At 6:47 on a Tuesday morning in late October, I found out that 4 months of being careful has a limit, and the limit, it turns out, is a flannel shirt missing its second button. I know how that sounds. A shirt. I am aware. But here is the thing about having a system. It only works if you have correctly identified everything the system needs to protect against. I thought I had. I've been pretty thorough about it. 117 days of living with Nora Calloway, 111 of them with the system running at full capacity, and not once had I slipped. I was, if nothing else, competent at this particular kind of discipline. The shirt was not in the model. It was mine. An old gray flannel I had had since my late 20s, the kind that gets softer every year until you stop noticing you are wearing it. The second button had been gone since the previous March. I had been meaning to replace it. I left it on the bathroom hook 2 nights before because the hook by my door was full and I was tired. That was the full extent of my thinking. I was tired, I hung up the shirt, I went to bed. I did not stop to think, this is a variable I should account for. So when Nora walked into the kitchen that morning, barefoot, hair not entirely awake yet, the shirt falling to about mid-thigh and gaping slightly at the collar where the missing button was not, I was not prepared. She did not look at me. She went straight to the cabinet on the left, pulled down the coffee filters, and started a pot with the same routine she ran every morning. Fill the cracked carafe to the 6-cup line. 1.5 scoops. Wait. She looked completely at ease. That was the part I had not built any defense against. Not the shirt itself, the ease of it. The fact that she had picked up something of mine and put it on without ceremony, without announcement. The way you do with something that already belongs to the space you are in. The way you do when a place is yours. I was standing at the counter with a mug of coffee I had already made, and I had 14 seconds to watch her before she finally looked up and said, "Morning," in that flat pre-coffee voice she had, the one that sounded like she was reporting a neutral fact about the day rather than offering a greeting. "Morning," I said. She looked back at the coffee maker. The carafe had a hairline crack in the glass she had been meaning to replace for 2 months. She never would. She said it still worked. She was not wrong. I looked at my coffee. I looked at the window. I looked at the maple tree outside the window that had been dropping leaves since the second week of October and was now about half bare. I did not look at the shirt. Here is what I know now, looking back. There had been signals before that morning. Not that I was unaware of something. I was not unaware. I knew exactly what I was dealing with, but signals about what the situation actually was versus what I had been telling myself it was. I had just been too organized to let myself read them. 6:47 on a Tuesday. A flannel shirt with a missing button. Nora Calloway saying, "Morning," like it cost her nothing at all. I had no idea yet what it was going to cost me. My name is Daniel Marsh. I am 32 years old. I manage construction projects for a mid-sized firm out of Portland, Oregon, residential builds mostly, some light commercial, the occasional renovation that was supposed to take 4 months and takes 11. The job is mostly problem solving and calendar management and knowing which subcontractor to call at 7 a.m. on a Friday when something has gone sideways and the client is already texting. I am good at it. I like it. There is something honest about work that produces a thing you can point to at the end. I have lived in Portland for 6 years. I got here from Boise because a job opened up and I was 26 and ready to be somewhere bigger. And Portland turned out to suit me in a way I had not fully expected. The pace of it, the neighborhoods, the fact that people here leave you alone in a way that feels respectful rather than cold. I found the apartment in Hawthorne in my second year and signed a 2-year lease and then just kept signing. 3rd floor, exposed, brick, good kitchen light in the mornings. The rent went up twice and I stayed both times, which tells you something about how I feel about starting over. I should tell you about Rachel. Not at length. This is not that story, and I made a rule about how much space I give it, but you need to know a version of it to understand the system. We were together for 3 years. I thought we were building something. She thought she was waiting to feel differently than she felt. On our last night together, she told me that being with me had always felt safe the way a waiting room feels safe, and that she had spent the whole time waiting for the safety to turn into something else. She said it gently, which was almost worse. She was not cruel about it. She was just honest in a way that arrived about 2.5 years too late to be useful. After that, I stopped expecting someone to look at what I was and decide it was what they wanted. Not in a dramatic way, I just quietly removed the expectation from the operating system and kept going. You would be surprised how functional that makes you. The spare room opened up about 10 months after Rachel left, when my friend Marcus moved out to buy a house with his girlfriend in Vancouver. I was not sure I wanted a roommate. I had gotten used to the quiet, but the math made it sensible. And being sensible about finances is one of those things I am reliably good at. I posted the listing on a Tuesday afternoon. Spare room in a 3-floor walk-up in Hawthorne. Furnished, quiet building, shared bathroom, available the first of the month. I asked for someone employed, clean, and willing to respect that the kitchen light dimmer switch existed for a reason. 7 people responded. I met 3 of them. The third one was Nora Calloway. She was 29. She made ceramics for a living, taught classes at a community arts center, and took commissions from local restaurants looking for handmade pieces for their tables. She had relocated to Portland from San Francisco 4 months before. She had a lease on a short-term rental that was ending, and she was ready to find something permanent. She was straightforward about all of this in about the time it took to finish a cup of coffee. She did not ask me about myself with the kind of careful interest that signals someone performing interest. She asked me about the kitchen light dimmer. I told her. She nodded, like that was a satisfactory answer. I rented her the room. The rules came about 3 weeks later, not because anything happened, because I noticed certain things and recognized what noticing them meant, and I decided that the responsible move was to build some structure around it. The rules were simple. Do not linger unnecessarily in common spaces. Keep your interactions friendly and impersonal. Do not ask questions you do not need the answers to. Do not do anything that would make the lease renewal awkward in 8 months. I followed them. They worked. I was organized about it in the same way I was organized about job sites. Identify what can go wrong. Build the process. Stick to the process. The process keeps you from making decisions you will regret at 7 in the morning when you are tired and someone is standing in your kitchen looking completely at home in your life. I want to be clear that I understood somewhere around week 3 exactly what I was protecting against. I was not confused about it. I was not in denial. I was just managing it the same way I managed everything else, quietly, confidently, without making it anyone else's problem. What I did not understand right up until the morning of the flannel shirt was that there is a version of a thing that no system actually protects you from. And that version is the ordinary one. Move-in day was a Saturday in mid-June, which in Portland means overcast and about 62 degrees with a 10% chance of rain that will quietly become 40% by noon. I had cleared out the spare room, replaced the overhead bulb, and left a spare key on the kitchen counter. I had also, without entirely meaning to, cleaned the apartment with a thoroughness I usually reserved for before my mother visited. I told myself that was just standard decency toward a new tenant. I heard her on the stairs before I saw her. Not loudly, just the specific sound of someone making multiple trips with things that were awkward to carry. I opened the door to help and found her in the hallway holding a cardboard box that was clearly heavier than she had planned for. Slightly tilted, a ceramic bowl balanced on top that was about 2 seconds from going over the edge. The bowl went over the edge. It hit the hallway floor, bounced once on the wood, and broke cleanly into 3 pieces. Nora set the box down, looked at the pieces for a moment, and said, "That one had a crack anyway." Not an apology, not embarrassment, just a fact she had apparently already made peace with. She picked up the box again and walked past me into the apartment like the hallway floor was not behind her. I looked at the 3 pieces of ceramic. I looked at the apartment. I followed her in. She had 4 trips worth of things: the box of ceramics, a rolling suitcase, a tote bag full of books with their pages folded down at the corners, and small pencil arrows drawn on the outside fold, and a single large plant in a handmade pot that she carried last, with both hands, with the focused attention of someone transporting something genuinely irreplaceable. She put the plant on the windowsill in her room without asking if that was all right. By the time I got around to offering to help with the last box, everything was already inside. "I think I got it," she said, and the tone was not unfriendly, just accurate. I showed her the bathroom, the kitchen, where I kept things and why. She listened without interrupting. When I got to the dimmer switch, she tried it once, nodded, and said, "Good call." I was not sure if that was a compliment or just an observation. With Nora, I would learn those were often the same thing. I offered coffee. She said yes. While I was making it, she walked the kitchen slowly, the way you walk a room when you are figuring out how it works. She opened 2 cabinets, closed them again, looked at the coffee maker, the cracked carafe, the coffee rings on the warming plate, and said nothing. Then she turned to look at the cabinet on the left, the one I kept mugs and dry goods in, and I watched her take it in with the same quiet attention she had given the plant. She did not say anything about it. But 2 days later, when I opened that cabinet to get a mug, things had been moved, slightly. Nothing dramatic. The mugs were still on the left, the coffee still above them, but the dry goods had been shifted about 4 inches to the right to give the mugs more clearance. And the spice jars had been lined up by height instead of by whatever logic I had been using before. I realized exactly the way I would have done it. I did not ask her about it. She did not mention it. But that was the first time I noticed something that I filed away without quite labeling the particular quality of attention she gave to spaces. How she looked at a room and found the thing that was slightly off, the adjustment that would cost nothing and fix something small. How she did it without announcing it. It reminded me uncomfortably of the way I replaced cabinet hinges without saying anything. I put the mug back and closed the cabinet. The system was at full capacity. Everything was fine. That was the first week of July. The thing about living with someone is that proximity is its own kind of information. You do not ask for it. You just accumulate it the way you accumulate the particular sounds a building makes, which pipes knock in the morning, which floorboard gives on the 3rd step. After a while, you stop hearing it as data and start hearing it as just the way things are. I had lived alone long enough to have forgotten that Nora reminded me fast. By the end of July, I knew that she was up by 7 on workdays and silent until the coffee was done. I knew she did her best thinking in the evenings and her worst in the hour before lunch. I knew she had 3 commissions running at the same time and organized them in her head by color. She had mentioned once, not to me exactly, just aloud in the kitchen while looking at her phone, the blue one is behind, but the amber one is almost there. And I had filed that away without remarking on it because she had not been talking to me. She had just been thinking the way people think when they are alone. That was the other thing about living with someone. After a certain number of weeks, you started to exist in each other's peripheral vision in a way that was different from being observed. Less performance in it, more just presence. I kept the system running. I was diligent about it, but I would be lying if I said the information was not accumulating anyway. The first real conversation happened on a Wednesday night in early August, 11:15, when I was replacing a cabinet hinge in the kitchen and Nora could not sleep. I had noticed the hinge 2 weeks before. It was pulling slightly from the frame on the lower cabinet, the kind of thing that would become a problem in another year if nobody dealt with it. I had a screwdriver and a replacement hinge in my tool bag. I had been waiting for a time when the apartment was quiet. 11:15 on a Wednesday was that time, or so I had thought. She came out of her room in a sweatshirt and socks, saw me on the floor with the cabinet door off its frame, and stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" she said. "Hinge was going," I said. She looked at the cabinet. She looked at the pile of hardware on the floor. She looked at me. "It is almost midnight," she said. "It is 11:15, I said. "That is almost midnight," she said. I did not have a strong counter-argument for that, so I went back to the hinge. She went to the refrigerator, stood in front of it for a moment with the door open, not looking for anything specific, the way you do when you cannot sleep, and you hope the refrigerator will have a suggestion, and then closed it without taking anything. She leaned against the counter. "You do this a lot," she said. "Do what I said. Fix things. I have seen you replace the towel hook and recaulk around the bathroom faucet, and now this. You do not say anything when you do it. You just do it." I set down the screwdriver. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said. "It is just, why do you never say anything? You could just mention it. Hey, I am going to fix the hinge this week. I would know to expect it." I thought about that for a second. It is easier to fix things than to ask if they are broken. She was quiet for a moment. The refrigerator hummed outside. The rain that had been threatening all day had finally started, a soft and directionless Portland rain that you heard more than you felt. That is a pretty exhausting way to live, she said. It is efficient, I said. Those are not the same thing, she said. I did not answer that. She watched me set the new hinge and test the swing of the cabinet door twice. When it moved cleanly, she made a small sound of approval that she probably did not know she had made. For what it is worth, she said, from the counter, not looking at me, I do not bite. I know, I said. I am not sure you do, she said. I looked up at her then. She tucked her hair behind her ear and held my gaze for about 3 seconds before she pushed off the counter and said, "Good night, Daniel," and went back to her room. I sat on the kitchen floor for a minute after she left, holding the screwdriver. Then I put everything back in the tool bag and went to bed. The farmer's market was not planned. The Saturday in question was the second week of August. Clear and cool, the way Portland sometimes surprises you in summer, and I had gone to pick up coffee beans from a roaster I liked, the one with a small stall near the south entrance that only had about 6 varieties and was always out of the one I actually wanted by 9:30. I had gotten there at 9:22, which I thought was early enough. The roaster was out of the Sumatra. I was standing in front of the stall holding a bag of something called Hillside Blend and feeling vaguely betrayed when someone stepped up beside me and said, "Is the Sumatra gone?" Nora. A canvas tote bag over one shoulder, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, looking at the remaining bags with the expression of someone who had also expected better of the situation. 9:22. I said, "I got here at 9:40, she said. She picked up the Hillside Blend and turned it over. "Is this any good?" "I have no idea. I have never had to buy it before." "That is not very reassuring." "No," she set it back down. We stood there for a moment in front of the stall, both having failed to achieve our respective goals, the morning being generally fine around us in the way of early August Saturdays. "I do not actually drink much coffee," she said, after a moment. I looked at her. "You make a pot every morning." "I drink 1 cup. It is ritual, not volume." She moved to the next stall, which was a tea vendor she apparently had a relationship with, because the woman behind the table said the usual, and Nora said, and one of the ginger ones, without breaking stride. She paid, tucked the small paper bag into her tote, and turned back to me with the mild satisfaction of someone whose morning had corrected itself. "Tea," I said. "Tea?" She agreed. "After 4 months, I did not know that about you. You did not ask." That was true. I had not. I walked with her past the vegetable stalls and a bread booth and a woman selling handmade candles in varying shades of amber because we were going the same direction, and it would have been strange to separate, and we did not talk much, but it was not the silence of 2 people who did not have anything to say. It was the comfortable kind, the kind you have to earn. At a honey stall near the north end, she stopped and spent a serious amount of time reading the labels. The vendor gave her a small wooden spoon with a taste of the buckwheat, and she considered it with the same focused attention she gave ceramics. She was examining, slowly, running through something in her mind that she did not share. "This one," she said to the vendor, and then picked up a second jar and added it to her tote before the transaction was finished. She handed me the second jar as we walked away from the stall. I looked at it. "What is this?" "Clover. For cooking. You use that pan of yours for everything, and you have never once done anything interesting with it." She adjusted the tote on her shoulder. "Also, you look like someone who does not take care of himself." "I eat fine. You had a granola bar and black coffee for breakfast last Tuesday." I saw. That was a busy Tuesday. They are all busy Tuesdays. I looked at the jar of honey. It had a handwritten label, local apiary, harvest date in July. It was a small, specific, completely unsolicited act of consideration, and I had no efficient way to categorize it within the operating parameters of the system. "Thank you," I said. "It is honey," she said. "Do not make it weird." I did not make it weird. I carried it home and put it on the second shelf of the kitchen cabinet on the right side where she could see it. I used it that night. I did not mention it, and neither did she. But the next morning, she made her coffee, opened the cabinet for a filter, and I saw her glance at the jar for just a second before she turned back to the counter. That was the second week of August. The balcony conversation happened in late August, on a Thursday evening, during the first real rain of the coming fall. I had come home from a site visit to find the apartment empty and the balcony door slightly open, not enough to let the rain in, but enough that I could hear it. I changed out of my work clothes and went to close it and found Nora outside, sitting in one of the two balcony chairs, forearms on the railing, looking at the street. She had pulled her hood up, but the rain had gotten to her anyway. The kind of persistent light rain that does not seem serious until you realize you have been in it for 20 minutes. I opened the door. "You know it is raining." "I know," she said. I stood in the doorway for a moment. She did not look like she was in distress. She looked like someone who had decided the rain was acceptable company and was not interested in better options. "Bad day," I said. "Complicated day," she said. I considered going back inside. I considered asking. I got the second chair and sat down. We did not talk for a few minutes. The rain came down on the maple trees and the street below and the rooftops of the Hawthorne neighborhood with the patient. Unhurried quality that Portland rain has in late August, like it knows it is settling in for a long stay and sees no reason to rush. "I lost a commission," she said eventually. "What happened?" Restaurant called last month. They had seen my work at another place in the Pearl and wanted a set for their new location. Tables, serving pieces, the whole thing. I had been working on it for 6 weeks. She turned her phone over in her hands, not looking at it, just holding it the way you hold something when you need your hands occupied. "They called today. The opening has been pushed back indefinitely. They are pausing the project. I am sorry," I said. "It is not a tragedy," she said, with the particular tone of someone who has already given themselves that speech and found it only partially convincing. "It happens. Projects fall through." I could have agreed with that. I could have offered the range of practical things you say in that situation. I looked at the rain. "Tell me about the piece," I said. She turned to look at me. "The work you were doing for them," I said. "Tell me what it was." A moment. The rain. She tucked her hair back. "It was a table set for a wood-fired Italian place," she said slowly. "They wanted something that felt like, not rustic exactly, worn, like the pieces had already been there for 20 years. So I was working in this deep amber glaze with a matte finish that shows the texture of the clay underneath, and the rims are slightly uneven. Not by mistake, on purpose." She paused. The idea was that the plates would look like they came from someone's grandmother's kitchen, not a store, someone's actual life. Were they any good? The question surprised her. "Yes," she said. "They were the best things I have made." "So you still made them?" She looked at me for a moment. "They were made for that restaurant. They were made by you," I said. That part did not change. She did not say anything. The rain was steady and unhurried. Below us, someone walked their dog along the wet sidewalk, the dog pulling left toward the maple tree, the person going along with it without complaint. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." She tucked her hair behind her left ear. "Why did you move here?" 6 years ago. You said Portland suited you, but you did not say why." It was not the question I had been expecting. I wanted somewhere that left me alone. "And does it?" "Mostly." "Is that enough?" I thought about that for a second. For a long time, it was, she turned that over, did not push it. That was one of the things I had learned about her. She asked the questions she actually wanted answered and then let them land wherever they landed. She did not chase. "I came here because I needed to prove something to myself," she said, after a while. "Not to anyone else. To me." She looked at her hands. "I was with someone for 4 years in San Francisco. He was not cruel. He was just very sure that I was a certain kind of person. And after a long time of being around someone who is very sure about who you are, you start to agree with them, even when they are wrong." She paused. I needed to be somewhere nobody already had a version of me, so I could find out what the real one was. "Did you?" I said. She considered that with the seriousness it deserved. "I am getting there," she said. The rain had been letting up gradually and we had not noticed, and now was barely more than a mist, the street below shining and dark and lit at intervals by the street lamps coming on in the early evening. "You were going to find somewhere else to show that work," I said. "Probably," she said. "Not probably." She looked at me. Something crossed her face that I did not have an immediate name for and did not try to find one. She stood up and stretched and pulled her damp hood down. Dinner, she said. I was going to make something with that chicken in the back of the fridge. I will make rice, she said, and went inside. I sat on the balcony for another minute by myself, listening to the last of the rain come down. I ran my thumb along the scar on my left palm and looked at the maple tree across the street and thought about what it means to need to prove something to yourself and how you know when you have done it. Then I went inside to make dinner. The pasta container appeared on a Wednesday in early September. And I want to be precise about this because the precision matters. I had an 8 o'clock meeting that morning on a site in Beaverton that had developed a drainage problem the previous owners had apparently been decorating around for years. I left the apartment at 7:15 without eating, which I was aware of, and told myself I would fix at the job site, where there was usually a truck from a taco place that's set up near the entrance around 11. The taco truck was not there. A different truck was there, a sandwich operation I had never tried, and I had half a sandwich at noon and another half at 2:30, and told myself that was adequate, which it was not, but the site had problems and the afternoon had problems, and by the time I was driving back to Portland, it was 7:40, and I had a persistent low-grade headache from the back of my skull that I knew was caloric and was choosing to characterize as stress. I came in through the door quietly because the apartment was dark and I assumed Nora was either out or already in her room, and I set my bag down and opened the refrigerator, looking for whatever was easiest. There was a lidded glass container on the second shelf. It had not been there this morning. There was a sticky note on the lid. You look like you skipped lunch yesterday too. Inside was pasta, the bucatini she had made the previous Sunday that I had a small bowl of, and complimented without expanding on because that was within system parameters. There was enough for a full meal. It had been labeled with a small additional note inside the lid, in her handwriting, reheat low. I stood in the kitchen holding the container. The apartment was quiet. The kitchen light was off, and I had not turned it on. Outside, a car went down the street, and its headlights moved across the ceiling and were gone. I stood there for a while longer than made sense. I want to explain something about this moment that is hard to explain without sounding like I am making more of it than it was. The container was pasta. The note was 6 words. These are not large things. I was aware of that. I am still aware of that. But there is a specific quality to being noticed without asking to be noticed. Not observed, noticed. The way someone catches a thing about you that you thought you were hiding well enough, and instead of using it against you or commenting on it in a way that made you feel managed, they just quietly did something about it without asking for credit. Rachel had never done that. Not once in 3 years. And I had never thought about it clearly until I was standing in a dark kitchen in September, holding a pasta container with a sticky note and understanding something that I was not yet ready to say out loud. I reheated it low. I ate it standing at the counter in the dark because I had not turned on the light and it seemed unnecessary at that point. I washed the container and left it on the drying rack. In the morning, it was back in the cabinet, and we did not talk about it, and she made her coffee in silence, the way she always did, and I got my bag and went to work. I thought about it the whole drive to the site. The last thing I need to tell you about from that period, the one I have thought about the most since, the one that makes the most sense in retrospect, happened on a Friday night in the middle of September after a building industry event I had gone to downtown. The event was the kind of thing I attended because it was professionally sensible and stayed at for exactly as long as professionally sensible required, which was about 2 hours. It was held in a new mixed-use development in the Pearl District, one of those spaces with high ceilings and temporary walls and catered food on platters that were difficult to eat standing up. I talked to the people I needed to talk to, had one drink, and left at 9:15. I got home at 9:40. The apartment was lit. The kitchen light on low, the glow under Nora's door. I changed out of the work clothes and went to the kitchen for a glass of water and found Nora already there, sitting at the counter with a book and a mug of tea, the kind of evening setup she had when she was not ready to sleep but was not doing anything in particular. She had pulled her hair back loosely and she was wearing the sweatshirt again, the gray one. "How was it?" she said. "Fine. Long. Any good buildings?" "One. A wood frame residential project on the west side, small firm out of Eugene. They are doing some interesting things with passive ventilation. Everything else was the usual." "What is the usual?" I got my glass of water and stayed at the counter because sitting down would have felt like a decision and not sitting would have felt strange. The usual is a lot of people in nice clothes talking about the cost of materials and pretending that it's the same as talking about buildings. She smiled at that, not a big smile, just the slight shift at the corner of her mouth that meant something had landed. Is it not? Buildings are physical things, I said. They sit in specific places and have specific light and specific problems, and people live in them. The cost of materials is just the cost of materials. Do you love it? The actual work, the question was direct in the way her questions usually were, which meant she actually wanted the answer and was not going to let a deflection stand. Yes, I said. I love the part where the thing exists and it is right. When you get to a job site and the framing is clean and the proportions are working and you can walk through it and it feels like it knows what it is, that part I love. That is how I feel when a glaze does what I wanted it to do, she said. That moment when you open the kiln and the thing in there is the thing you meant. Does it always work? No, she said. That is what makes it good when it does. We talked for a long time after that about her current commission, a set for a small ramen place in the Division Street neighborhood. She was working in a dark indigo that she kept describing with the focused frustration of someone who knew exactly what she wanted and was not yet there. About a project I had coming up in the spring, a renovation on a 20s era Craftsman in Southeast Portland. The kind of job where half the work was figuring out what the original builder had been thinking about Portland in the fall, which she had been waiting to experience since she moved, and whether the reality was living up to what she had expected. She said it was she said there was something about a city that had seasons that made her feel like time was actually moving. You did not have that in San Francisco, I said. San Francisco has weather, she said. Not quite seasons. Here it actually changes. She turned her mug in her hands. I like the feeling of things actually changing. It was 11:42 by the kitchen clock, which I noticed because I had been aware that we had been talking for a while and had kept not doing anything about it. The kitchen light was low and the rain had come back, the steady kind, and the apartment was quiet around us in the particular way apartments get late at night, all the ordinary sounds of the building settling into themselves. I stood up to refill my glass of water. The tap ran cold, which it always did after a minute, and I stood at the sink with my back to her and the glass under the faucet and thought a clear and specific thought that I then put back where it came from. I turned around. She was looking at her mug. I should sleep, I said. Yeah, she said. I set the glass down. She did not move. I did not move. The rain went on outside. The clock said 11:43. Night, I said. Night, she said. I went to my room and closed the door and lay in the dark and listened to the rain for a long time. I heard her rinse her mug in the sink. I heard the light click off. I heard her door close. I stared at the ceiling and thought, the system is working, which was technically true. I had said goodnight. I had gone to my room. Nothing had happened. What I did not admit to myself, not yet, was that nothing happening had started to feel like the most effortful thing I did all day. Jason Keene arrived on a Friday afternoon in early October, which I know because I had taken the afternoon off to catch up on project documentation and was at the kitchen table with my laptop when Nora's phone buzzed and she went to the window and looked down at the street and said, with a tone I had not heard from her before, "Oh, not a good O. Not a bad O either. Just the particular sound of something arriving that you thought you would have more warning about." I looked up. She was still at the window, phone in her hand, not responding to whatever the message said. "Everything okay?" I said. "An old friend is in town," she said. I did not know he was coming. She texted something brief and went to her room to change, and I went back to my documentation, and 20 minutes later the buzzer went and she let him up. He was about my height, maybe an inch shorter, dressed in the careful, casual way of someone from the tech industry who wanted to appear relaxed and had thought about it. Dark jacket, clean sneakers. He shook my hand with real warmth and said he had heard a lot about the apartment and it was even nicer than he had pictured. And the way he said it was smooth and immediate in the manner of someone who has spent years making first impressions professionally. His name was Jason. Jason and I were together in San Francisco, Nora said, with the neutrality of someone supplying a fact rather than a context. Ancient history, Jason said, with an easy smile that was doing a lot of work. He stayed for dinner. He was good at dinner, asking the right questions, listening with visible attention, laughing at the right moments. He asked me about the construction business with what seemed like genuine curiosity, and he asked Nora about the ceramics work with warmth and something that looked a lot like pride. And the three of us sat around the kitchen table until almost 9, with the dinner plates pushed to the side and the conversation moving easily from one thing to the next. If you had walked in without knowing anything, you would have said, 3 friends, good evening, everyone comfortable. I noticed things, though. The way he occasionally finished Nora's sentences, not rudely, almost helpfully, but a half beat before she got there. The way he said classic Nora twice at moments when she had said something he had apparently heard her say before, and the way that phrase worked to put a frame around her, to locate her in a version of herself that predated Portland. The way he watched the apartment, cataloging it, the way you catalog a space you are trying to understand or trying to locate someone inside of. Nora was different with him in the room, not diminished. She was too decided for that. But there was a quality of watchfulness to her that was not usually there, a slight compression of the ease I had gotten used to. She laughed freely, but I could see her measuring something underneath the laugh. He stayed until 10 and then said he had a hotel in the Pearl in an early morning, and he would love to grab coffee tomorrow if Nora was free. She said maybe. He hugged her at the door and shook my hand again and said it had been great to meet me, and I said the same thing, and the door closed. Nora stood in the kitchen for a moment with her back to me, looking at the counter. He seems nice, I said, because it was the thing to say. He is, she said. Mostly. She went to her room not long after that, and I did the dishes, and I thought about what mostly meant and decided it was not my business. He came back the next day. Nora had a morning class at the art center and left at 9. He texted at 9:15, apparently, because the buzzer went at 9:20, and when I answered the intercom, he said, "Hey, it is Jason. Is Nora around?" And I said she was at work, and he said, "Oh, I must have gotten the time wrong. Mind if I come up and wait? I just need 10 minutes. The 10 minutes became 40. I made coffee because it would have been strange not to. And he sat at the kitchen table in the easy way of someone who is entirely comfortable in spaces that are not his. And we talked about Portland for a while and the neighborhood and the building. And it was pleasant and unremarkable. And then with the kind of subtle shift in register that I recognized from certain difficult conversations on job sites, he set down his mug and said, "Can I be straight with you?" Man to man, I looked at him. "I can see what is happening here," he said, "or what is about to happen. And I do not want to overstep. I genuinely do not. But I have known Nora a long time. And I feel like I would be doing both of you a disservice if I did not say something." He said it with the tone of someone who had already decided he was doing you a favor. That particular tone. "She is incredible," he said. "I mean that. She is talented and she is warm, and when she is good, she is like, there is nobody like her." He paused. "But she needs a lot of maintenance. I just thought you should know that before you get too attached." The kitchen was quiet. The coffee maker had finished its cycle and the burner had clicked off, and the rain was starting outside in the soft beginning of October way, and I could hear it on the balcony door. "She is intense," he continued, and his voice had that quality of reasonableness of someone simply reporting facts. "She takes everything seriously, which is great. But when something goes wrong, she does not just deal with it. She processes it out loud, at length, and you are expected to be there for all of it. And the work, the ceramics, the commissions, she wraps herself up so completely in it that when things do not go the way she planned, it becomes this whole thing. I do not want you to walk into that without being prepared." He looked at me with the expression of a man performing concern. "I spent 4 years trying to keep up," he said. "I just want to be honest with you." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "I appreciate you telling me," which was not agreement, but he received it as agreement because it was the polite surface of agreement, and that was enough for him. He finished his coffee and was gone before Nora got home. I should tell you what happened inside me after that conversation, because it is the part I am least proud of. What Jason had said was transparently self-serving. I knew that. I could see the shape of it clearly. A man who had spent 4 years diminishing someone, watching her leave and rebuild herself in a new city, and now arriving to make sure the narrative he had built around her preceded her wherever she went. I could see it, and it still got in. Not the part about her being too much. I did not believe that, not for a minute. What got in was the other part, the architecture of it. Because what Jason had essentially said to me was, she will make you feel insufficient. And that sentence in that voice landed directly on the specific spot where Rachel had been, and it stayed there. Here's what I had been telling myself since September, that the system was a reasonable precaution, that I was being responsible, that two people sharing an apartment had good practical reasons to keep their lives clean and uncomplicated, that my feelings were real and I was simply choosing with deliberate maturity not to act on them, that this was not self-protection but wisdom. What Jason's voice did, landing on top of Rachel's voice, was give me a new story, a more frightening one, that maybe I had been reading Nora wrong, that maybe what I had experienced as ease and recognition and the particular quality of being noticed was simply her way of existing in a space, warm with everyone, attentive to everyone, and I had been assigning it a meaning it did not have. That I was, once again, the person who thought they were building something while someone else was simply passing through. I knew, rationally, that this was Jason's voice talking. I knew it. And I still pulled back. Nora noticed within a day. She was too perceptive not to. On Saturday evening, I was quieter than usual, and she let it go. On Sunday, I found reasons to be out most of the afternoon, and she let that go too. But on Monday, when she came home from the art center and found me at the kitchen table and said, how was the site? And I said, fine, and did not ask about her day, which was a thing I had started doing somewhere in the past 2 months. Just a small thing. How is the indigo piece going? Or did the ramen place write back? She stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, and I could feel her taking stock of what was different. Did I do something? She said. No, I said. And that was true, but the way I said it was the problem. She nodded once, the slow nod of someone filing information they were not done with yet, and went to her room. I sat at the table and stared at the project documentation I was not reading. The thing about creating distance deliberately is that it does not feel neutral to the person on the other side of it. I knew that. I had been on the other side of it once with Rachel, that last month before she ended things, when something had shifted in her and she had started being careful with me in a way she had not been before. I had felt the careful as a withdrawal. I had spent 3 weeks trying to figure out what I had done wrong. And here I was doing the same thing to Nora for reasons that were mine and had nothing to do with her, except that I had let one man with an agenda reach into the place where I was most breakable and hand me a story I was afraid was true. On Tuesday, she over-explained dinner. I mean that specifically. She was making pasta and she narrated the whole process in a continuous gentle stream, the water temperature, the sauce, why she was using this particular pan, a fact about the garlic. It was the over-explaining that happened when she was hiding something, the behavioral habit I had cataloged in the first weeks. What she was hiding was that she was scared. Not of me exactly, of the distance, of not knowing what had changed. I sat at the counter and listened and hated myself quietly and said, it smells good, and meant it. After dinner, I went to my room and lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about what it meant that I had heard Jason's voice and believed it even partially. I thought about Rachel and about waiting rooms and about what it feels like to be told that the thing you are is not quite enough. I thought about Nora on the balcony in the rain saying I needed to be somewhere nobody already had a version of me. I thought about a man who had spent 4 years giving her a version of herself she had driven across a state line to get away from, and then had the specific audacity to drive up to Portland and start distributing that version to her new neighbors. I thought about what I was doing. I was letting a man who had made her feel small hand me a reason to do the same thing with different words. I was choosing the story that confirmed my worst fear about myself, that I was the waiting room, that I was the thing people pass through on the way to something better over the evidence of the last 4 months. The cabinet hinge, the honey, the balcony. 11:43 on a Friday night when neither of us moved. I was organized. I was competent. I was so careful, and I was about to lose the realest thing that had happened to me in 3 years because I was more comfortable with the fear than with the risk. I lay in the dark for a long time. Then I got up. And went to the kitchen and stood at the counter in the dark for a minute, not sure what I was going to do next. I knew I needed to say something. I did not know how to say it without making it about me, without making her responsible for managing my history on top of everything else. I did not want to explain Jason. I did not want to explain Rachel. I did not want to perform a revelation at her at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday and ask her to receive it graciously. The kitchen light was off. Through the balcony door, I could see the maple tree, stripped down to its last few leaves, now lit from below by the street lamp. October had gone cold in the last week, and the window had a thin layer of condensation at the bottom corners. I stood there for a while, then I heard her door open. She came down the hall in her socks, the gray sweatshirt, her hair down. She stopped when she saw me standing in the dark kitchen. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The building made its sounds around us. The rain had stopped earlier in the evening and left everything outside damp and still. I could not sleep, she said. Me neither, I said. She looked at me for a moment with a specific quality of attention she gave things she was trying to understand. Then she came to the counter and leaned against it, about 3 feet from where I was standing, and crossed her arms loosely, not defensively, just settled. Are you going to tell me what happened? She said. Jason came by, I said. Saturday morning, while you were at work. A pause. What did he say? Things that were about him, not you. I knew that when he said them, I stopped, and I let them in anyway. That part was mine. She was quiet for a moment. I could see her processing it, not performing patience, actually thinking. What did he say? She said again. Quieter this time. That you were high maintenance, I said. That you needed a lot of looking after. That he wanted to warn me before I got too attached. I looked at the window. He framed it as a favor. Something moved across her face that was not quite anger and not quite something else. She looked at the counter. He said that to you, she said. Flat. Not a question. Yes. And you believed him. I believed the part that scared me most, I said, which was not about you. She turned to look at me then, and the expression on her face was careful in a way that told me she was deciding something, whether to stay in the conversation, whether it was worth the cost. I had a whole version of this prepared. An explanation of Rachel, of the waiting room, of why Jason's particular framing had found the exact crack it was looking for. I had it ready because I was organized and I had been lying in the dark preparing it for an hour. I did not say any of it. What do you want? I said. The question landed in the quiet kitchen and sat there. She looked at me for a long moment. I could see the calculation in it, not calculation in a cold way, but the real kind, the honest weighing of a person who has learned to be careful about what they step toward. She had driven across a state line. She had rebuilt herself in a city that did not know her. She had not done all of that to walk into the same room wearing different furniture. She tucked her hair behind her left ear. I spent 4 years making myself easier to hold, she said. I am not doing that here. The words were quiet and entirely certain, the way things are certain when someone has been carrying them for a long time and is finally setting them down somewhere permanent. Not an argument, not a declaration requiring a response, a statement of fact about who she had decided to be. She crossed the 3 feet of kitchen between us. She put her hand against my jaw, her palm cool from the counter, and looked at me the way she had looked at the amber glaze she was trying to get right, with total attention, like she was deciding whether the thing in front of her was the thing she meant. Is this okay? I said. Yes, she said. I kissed her in the dark kitchen at 11:22 on a Tuesday in October, with the cracked carafe on the counter and the maple tree outside going bare and the dimmer switch on low. And it was one of those moments that, even while you were inside it, that you are going to carry for the rest of your life. She did not pull back, neither did I. After a while, she rested her forehead against mine, and we stood like that for a moment in the quiet. I ran my thumb along the scar on my left palm, out of habit or old reflex. And she caught the motion and looked down and took my hand and held it without asking what it was. I did not say anything. She did not ask me to. Jason does not know what he is talking about, I said eventually. I know, she said. I should have known it sooner. You got there, she said. That is the part that counts. There was a particular quality to the silence after that, not empty, not waiting for anything, just present, the building settling. The last of October, outside the window. I have been aware of this since week 3, I said. She pulled back just far enough to look at me. Week 3. Week 3, I said. You had a system, she said. I had a system. That is the most you thing I have ever heard, she said. I know, she laughed. A real one. Low and warm. the kind she did not always let happen. I felt it against my shoulder. I thought about the bowl she had dropped in the hallway on move-in day and the way she had said that one had a crack anyway without a moment's hesitation. And I thought about how long it takes to become the kind of person who can let things break without treating it as a failure, and how much it costs, and how much it is worth. I should have said something earlier. I said, "You are saying it now," she said. "Is that enough?" She leaned back to look at me again, and she tucked her hair back, and she said, "Ask me something easier." So I did not ask. I stayed where I was, and she stayed where she was. And outside, the last maple leaves came down in the dark without anyone watching. There are things I could tell you about the rest of that night, the conversation that went until 2 a.m, the particular relief of not being careful anymore, the way the apartment felt different when I finally went to bed, like the walls had shifted a few inches outward and given me room I had not known I was missing. I will spare you most of it. Some things earn the right to stay between the people they happen to. What I will tell you is this. At some point near the end of the night, sitting on the kitchen counter while she made tea, because she said she needed something warm, and I had said I would make it, and she had said she would rather do it herself. I watched her move through the kitchen with the ease I had been watching for 4 months. The cabinet on the left, 1.5 scoops, the cracked carafe she would never replace. And I understood finally what the flannel shirt had been about. Not the shirt. Not what I had read into the shirt. What the shirt had actually shown me that morning in late October was something I had been too organized to let myself believe. She was already home. The question was never whether she would let me in. The question was whether I was going to stop protecting myself long enough to walk through the door. 8 months later, on a Tuesday morning in late June, I came into the kitchen at 7:15 and found Nora at the counter with a cup of coffee she had not touched yet and a paper bag from the grocery store that she was drawing on with a pencil. This was a thing she did. Sketch commission ideas on whatever surface was available when the idea came. I had found preliminary drawings on the back of utility envelopes, on the cardboard insert from a cereal box, on 3 paper napkins from a ramen place on division that she had folded into her jacket pocket and discovered 2 weeks later. The paper bag that morning had a rough elevation of a set of shallow bowls across its side, the proportions shifting slightly with each iteration. The line she was looking for somewhere in the middle of the series. She did not look up when I came in. I made coffee. I stood at the counter and drank it and watched the maple tree outside the window, which had come back fully by May and was now deep green and dense and throwing a wide shadow across the street below in the morning light. The balcony door was open. A June morning in Portland, cool and clear. The particular kind of day the city offers a few times a year as a reminder of what it can do when it is not raining. She reached out her left hand without looking up from the paper bag. I took it. We stood like that in the kitchen for a while, her drawing with her right hand, my coffee in my left, her hand and mine between us. And the morning went on around us the way mornings do, ordinary and unhurried, and hours. The flannel shirt was on her side of the closet now, had been since November. I had noticed it move there by degrees, the bathroom hook first, then folded on the chair in her room, then one morning simply present among her things with the unannounced permanence of something that had decided it lived there. I never said anything about it. It did not need saying. The cracked carafe was still on the coffee maker. I had replaced it twice. Both times, she had thanked me, used it once, and quietly retrieved the cracked one from wherever I had put it. I had stopped buying replacements. The crack, she maintained, gave the coffee character. I did not agree with this position and had accepted it completely. The ramen place on division used her bowls. Now, the deep indigo ones, she had spent 3 months getting right, the ones that had made her stand in front of the open kiln for a full minute without speaking before she had said, simply, "There it is." The restaurant had framed a small card on the wall crediting the ceramics. She had seen it once and then spent the entire drive home explaining to me, with great conviction, why that was embarrassing. I had listened and disagreed, and she had been secretly pleased, which I knew because of the way her mouth went when she was secretly pleased, and because I had been paying attention for 11 months. The project I had in the spring, the Craftsman renovation in Southeast Portland, had come in 3 weeks ahead of schedule, which in this industry is roughly equivalent to a minor miracle. On the day we finished, I came home and told Nora, and she opened a bottle of wine she'd been keeping for something specific and would not tell me what until that moment. She had bought it in November. She had been waiting for the right day. I want to tell you what I know now that I did not understand then. I spent years being careful with myself, building systems, identifying variables, staying confident and clean and organized against the possibility of something going wrong again. And all that carefulness accomplished exactly one thing. It kept me standing at the edge of my own life, managing it from a safe distance, watching it run efficiently without me actually being inside it. What Nora taught me, not through any speech or revelation, but just by being who she was in the space we shared, is that some people do not need you to rescue them. They just need you to stop protecting yourself long enough for them to choose you. And when someone chooses you the way she chose me, deliberately, clearly, at full size, without making herself easier to hold, the only thing left to do is choose them back. That is it. That is the whole lesson. It took me a flannel shirt and a missing button and 11 months to learn it. I would say I wish I had learned it sooner, but I am not sure I was ready until I was. Here is what I want to ask you before we finish. What would you have done that morning if someone you had been carefully, competently not feeling anything about walked into your kitchen wearing your shirt and looked completely at home in your life?
And have you ever had a system like mine? The kind where you knew exactly what you were dealing with and thought you had it under control, right up until the moment you did not. Tell me your story in the comments.
I read every one of them.
If this story meant something to you, leave a like. It helps more than you might think. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe and hit the bell so you do not miss them.
I will see you in the next one.